Again, this is Sid Haas with LKCS. I'm the Vice President of Business Development here, and I've been actively speaking with many of our credit union clients and many credit unions across the country and numerous denial of service prevention and mitigation companies over the past several months, and discussing the recent credit union DDoS attacks and what credit unions need to do to prepare themselves for these types of attacks, and how to actually get protection and mitigation services and what's available to protect you from DDoS attacks. So today's webinar is really going to focus on quite a bit of background on DDoS attacks. What are they? What are these people trying to achieve? How are they attacking banks and credit unions? And then what options you have to mitigate those attacks. For those of you that are not familiar with LKCS, we've been in business since 1961 and have been serving credit unions for that entire time. We offer a wide range of marketing and member communication services, and over the last 10 or 15 years, our focus has clearly been on utilizing our customers' data to better improve their marketing services. We also have a large suite of web marketing and web development, web hosting services, e-statement services, and things like that. So when we talk in particular about denial of service, DDoS attacks, obviously that's, we want to make sure that our customers' web presence and our e-statement platform and everything is protected from those types of attacks as well. So that's really how we got started in learning about DDoS attacks, was to protect our infrastructure and our clients' websites and our web hosting platforms. But as we learn more and more about it, we feel that it's very important for us to share this information with our credit unions. So for those of you, that are wondering what a DDoS attack is, DDoS stands for Distributed Denial of Service Attack, and the goal of, these attackers is to deny service basically to your members and customers. They want to deny access to your website, your home banking applications, whatever it might be. And the word distributed is a very important component because these attacks are distributed across many computers and many internet connections. And we'll talk about this in much more detail, but typically, thousands or millions of server requests are made consecutively to overwhelm your web servers, your firewalls, your routers, and all of your internet bandwidth, to basically flood the pipes, as you would say, to deny that service, to your members and customers. So they're not actually, in most cases, not necessarily bringing your web server down. They're just making it slow and making it impossible for that web server to fulfill all of the requests coming at it. And one of the key points on this slide is that there is no way to prevent a DDoS attack. So we can scrub them and mitigate against them, but you can't actually stop them. There's no way to prevent these attacks because in a lot of cases, these web requests that are being made are legitimate requests. It's just that they're flooding you with them to overwhelm your connections. So how a DDoS attack, there's really three phases of a DDoS attack. The first phase is just target acquisition. I mean, these attackers literally pick the companies and organizations, and sometimes even individual data centers or servers that they want to attack. And the reason to attack, your company could be financial. It could be, the latest term is hacktivism. So they're trying to make a political statement. And unfortunately, it can be just for malicious fun. I'll show you in a few slides, literally anybody with a grudge against your credit union has the ability to launch an attack. It's very, very easy. Scary how easy it is. Phase two is the groundwork, and typically for these large-scale attackers, they compromise a large number of unsecured computers, and these are typically, these are called botnets, and they're typically home machines, or small company machines with fast, high-speed broadband internet connections, and they gain control of these computers, put malicious software on those computers, and use them to attack your institution. And I'll show you again in a few slides that these can even be rented by the hour. So you don't necessarily have to go out, an attacker doesn't necessarily have to go out and compromise their own computers. They can actually pay for access to computers that somebody else has already compromised. And phase three is they launch their attack. So they send a command to these compromised computers, these botnets, which once they're, they start actually attacking somebody. They're known as zombie computers, and they command them to flood, your company, your credit union, with those legitimate web requests, just overwhelming your servers and choking all of the bandwidth that you have. And the attack lasts as long as the attacker wants it to, or for as long as they can afford. Basically, what you'll find is if you effectively mitigate an attack and the attacker sees that the attack is not effective, they will stop attacking you and move on to the next target because they're not having an effect. They're not having the fun. They're not getting the result that they wanted, so they're just going to move on. And, your goal in mitigation is to end that attack and end it as quickly as you can. So just to give you some statistics about botnets, a botnet can generate 1 million times the bandwidth, that your credit union has. And we'll talk about bandwidth quite a bit, and I'll show you some numbers. There's just no way for you to have enough bandwidth. So, a lot of credit unions have said, yeah, but we've got a 50 meg connection or a 100 megabit connection to the internet, or, we're getting gigabit fiber. That's child's play, unfortunately, to the size of some of these attacks. It takes just 64,000 PCs, which sounds like a huge number of computers, but it takes 64,000 PCs to generate a 10 gigabit per second attack. Unfortunately, the largest botnet, which was known as Mariposa, affected 12 million PCs. So 64,000, which seemed like a large number a few seconds ago, is a minuscule number when we compare it to 12 million affected PCs that could have, never did, but they could have generated a DDoS attack as large as 31 terabytes per second. I don't think that there's any way for any mitigation provider to mitigate an attack anywhere near that scale. As I mentioned already, these attackers can rent botnets by the hour. And there are literally dozens of companies selling DDoS as a service, not selling DDoS mitigation or protection as a service, selling the actual DDoS attacks as a service. And, I've listed some of I wouldn't recommend necessarily surfing to these websites, but there are some of the names of these companies. And literally you can pay $5 for an hour, $40 for a day, $260 for a week, pay with your PayPal account, your Bitcoin account, and some even take MasterCard or Visa. And everybody's like, well, why can't they get shut down? And the answer is because they offer their services to stress test your organization and to verify that you can effectively mitigate against a DDoS attack. The problem is that they don't verify that anyone buying this stress test has any affiliation with the targeted company. So they don't verify if you're an employee or, if you have any authorization to launch these attacks. But, if I want to attack, the Bank of America, I can say, I'm going to subscribe to one of these stress test services and launch an attack against the Bank of America, and I can do it for as long as I'm willing to pay for it. I don't even necessarily need to subscribe to a service to launch an attack. Literally one, member or customer that has a gripe against you can actually go down and download a piece of software such as this one called the Low Orbit Ion Cannon. And if they have a large enough, internet pipe, which, obviously, cable internet and things like that, they just doubled the speed Comcast did. Just doubled the speed available to all home users. They've got, these home computers now have massive, bandwidth available to them. Literally, they put in an IP address or a domain name that they want to attack. There's a little slider here that shows how much, speed, basically the size of the attack that they want to initiate, and they can initiate this type of attack. And that's not the only one. I mean, there's a few other, literally you can search for open source DDoS and, find all of these different little DDoS programs that you can install and attack whoever you want at will. I wouldn't recommend doing that, but, just to show you how easy, it can be. And for those of you wondering about the types of attacks, this is some technical information, but there's a few different types of attacks when it comes to, I guess, categories, I guess, of DDoS attacks. So there's volume-based attacks, and that's really what I was talking about there. They're just flooding the internet connections, with numerous requests, millions and millions of requests, and the magnitude of these attacks are measured in bits per second, and you'll see in megabits and gigabits per second now. And there's protocol attacks, which pick on a very specific type, of command. So, for those of you familiar with SYN floods and ping of death and Smurf DDoS attacks and things, they're consuming the resources. So they're just making specific requests, of a certain type, and these requests demand a response from that web server or that firewall or that router, and there's just so many of them that these devices can't respond fast enough. And that's just measured in the packets per second as far as attack size. And there are application layer attacks, and these are the attacks that are targeting specific parts of your website, specific pieces of your application, of your home banking application. So if you're aware of any of the most recent attacks against some of the larger credit unions, to give you an idea of an application layer attack, one attack in particular kept requesting password resets from a home banking platform. And they just requested thousands upon thousands of password reset requests, and that server couldn't possibly respond to all of them. So it literally made the authentication process, the login process to home banking, non-responsive because it just kept targeting the password request. Another similar attack against one of the credit unions, a couple of months ago, actually just made thousands of requests for a PDF document that was on the website. And they just kept requesting thousands and thousands, tens of thousands of time, at a time, requests for a specific PDF, whether it was a brochure, a newsletter, whatever it was, some kind of form that was on that website. They just kept requesting that same PDF, and the same thing happened. The server that hosted that PDF, or the bandwidth available to it just could not, send that document enough times to the people requesting it, making the entire site non-responsive. The important thing to know, though, is that these DDoS attacks, they can change profiles on the fly. So in the case of that PDF, the credit union obviously saw what was happening. They saw which PDF was being attacked, so they renamed the PDF. Well, the attack stopped because that PDF was renamed, but they then changed to a different type of attack and attacked the website, either a different file on that website or a different way to attack that website. So that attack was, ended for a few seconds, but as soon as the attackers saw, well, gee, they just renamed the PDF, they went on to attack the site a different way. So, these DDoS attacks can last longer because they switch from one attack type or one attack profile to another as you mitigate the attack. To give you an idea of attack growth from quarter to quarter and year to year, what's interesting, and when I looked at industry data, DDoS protection data for the last 3 months, the pure number of attacks worldwide was not significantly greater last quarter than this quarter. So the total number of attacks wasn't really any different. Now, unfortunately, I could not find data relating specifically to banks and credit unions because I have a feeling that the number of attacks against banks and credit unions was much higher this quarter than it was last quarter or the quarter before, but that data just doesn't exist. So at least that I could find. But what I can tell you is that the average attack size, the attack bandwidth, is up over 700% from the Q4 of 2012 to Q1 of 2013. The average attack size 3 months ago was 5.9 gigabits per second, which is still a very large attack size, but it jumped all the way to 48.25 gigabits per second. Not surprisingly, China is still the #1 source country for DDoS attacks. That's a question I get a lot. Well, can these sites be prosecuted, these attackers be prosecuted? And obviously there's all sorts of reasons why that's typically very difficult, if not impossible and unlikely to ever happen. I can tell you though that in the past year, while the number of DDoS attacks did not increase dramatically in the past 3 months, in the past year there has been a 21% increase in the total number of DDoS attacks, comparing Q1 of 2012 to Q1 of 2013. So I don't expect this to slow down. So now I'm going to turn it over to you guys. I have a few poll questions that I'm going to throw out during the webinar today. So I would like to know if you could answer the question that's showing on your screen, and I will show everybody the answers. How likely you feel that your credit union will become a victim of a DDoS attack within the next 12 months. I see some answers coming in. I'll leave the poll open for a few more seconds. Okay, I'm going to close the poll and show the results. So what you'll see is that 20% of you have already been the victim of a DDoS attack. So it'll be interesting. I would be interested to know what types of protection you have in place now that you have been victimized. But we'll talk about the different types of protection available. 40% feel that it's likely, and 40% feel that it's not likely over the next 12 months. And that's pretty much what we see industry-wide. The 0%, very likely. I would hope if there was anybody that was very likely to be attacked, that you would be actively looking to secure DDoS mitigation services. And the rest of you are honestly waiting to see probably what's happening, and wanting more information and needing to know if you need certain protection. So I will hide this and we'll go back to the presentation. And I want to talk a little bit about what's at risk if you were to become the victim of a DDoS attack, and what the different costs are. So obviously the first is that your brand is damaged. If your website is down, your members don't have access. You've been telling them how you have a safe place to bank and their information is secure, and all of a sudden they can't access it. Unfortunately, that does damage your brand reputation. There is a loss of revenue. I mean, without online banking, bill pay, online forms, applications, online account opening, all of those types of services that you're now offering through your online channel, when that's unavailable, you are losing revenue. Obviously, it's bad member service, it's a bad member experience. Your call centers are going to get overwhelmed because people are going to be calling saying they can't get into home banking and, can't get to bill pay, and they need to, execute their transactions. That's going to obviously frustrate your members and potentially, have them seek other alternatives for their banking needs. And unfortunately, you have the costs to mitigate a DDoS attack. And you have to, you're going to want that type of coverage because you have limited staff and a limited budget, to manage these types of things. And honestly, DDoS mitigation is very inexpensive compared to these other costs. The numbers that I've seen show that a DDoS attack can cost you between $10,000 and $50,000 per hour in lost revenue. Now, those are the published numbers. I don't necessarily agree or disagree with them, but I mean, obviously you can see that they can get very expensive, to your organization very, very quickly. I'm sure you all have ways to measure the cost of downtime in your organization, and it's probably higher than any of us think. There's one more important thing to note here, and that is that DDoS attacks are more and more frequently being used to hide security threats. Because what happens is an attacker launches a DDoS attack, and you focus all of your resources on mitigating that attack. You want to make sure that your services are restored. You're not the log files and the things that all of the intrusion prevention systems, everything you're using to monitor your network and monitor your web servers and your web applications all get overwhelmed. These log files get huge. I mean, just, exponentially larger than anything you've seen. You can't possibly, analyze them fast enough to find all the underlying information. You focus on mitigating that attack, the log files go back down to normal, and you're like, phew, we got through it. Meantime, some of these, a growing percentage of these attacks are actually hiding the fact that there's a security intrusion going on at the same time as that DDoS attack. And that attack ends long before you actually identify that intrusion. The good news is that this is not a huge percentage of DDoS attacks, but it is growing. So it's something to be aware of, that in addition to the DDoS attack itself, your information and your members' information could literally be breached or potentially breached at the same time as that attack, because you're focusing on mitigating that attack. You're rebooting servers, you're rebooting routers, and as you're doing that, you're losing all of the potential data to find out that attack was actually going on. Give you some numbers. There's currently up to 130,000 DDoS attacks worldwide per day, every day. And the recent attacks have grown as large as 300 gigabits per second. Obviously, all companies, and I put specifically small and mid-sized banks and credit unions, but I got to think even the bigger ones, size bandwidths to what they need to handle their average web traffic, incoming and outgoing. It doesn't matter how much bandwidth you thought you needed, you do not have 300 gigabits per second of bandwidth. The largest data centers in the world don't have 300 gigabits per second of bandwidth. And if you remember that attack against Spamhaus on March 27th, that 300 gigabit per second attack, that was the one, that was the largest DDoS attack on record. That slowed internet traffic worldwide. It was so large. So, I mean, just the massive amount of traffic slowed all of the major, intersections of all of the various networks. So, I mean, there's just no way to have enough bandwidth at your disposal, on your own to mitigate these types of attacks. There are some things we learned about the recent credit union attacks. I mean, obviously I told you some of the ways that these credit unions were attacked, but some of the things that we learned as a result of the attacks were that the firewalls and intrusion detection systems, they're really ineffective at DDoS protection. They protect your data, they protect your network, they provide limited protection up to a point. They have the various signatures, installed to block, these DDoS attacks, but they get overwhelmed by just the sheer amount of traffic. And when the massive amounts of traffic are sent to these devices, they crash. Or they just become, completely inoperable just because of the sheer number of requests being made at them. And even the banks and credit unions that have dedicated DDoS mitigation appliances didn't always have the trained staff to use them effectively. So even if they made the investment to go out and buy their own dedicated appliances specifically designed to handle, these millions and thousands of requests coming at them, they didn't have the people that could make the changes and apply the filters in real time that needed to be applied to have those appliances really work. And most of you on the call aren't huge banks or credit unions. You're smaller institutions, and you're more vulnerable to these attacks. You don't have the budgets to spend, and I'll show you some numbers, we'll talk about it, but you don't have the funds to spend on in-house DDoS protection. It requires a significant investment in hardware, software, and really the most difficult one is the human experience that you need to handle this in-house. Even the smallest attacks, the attacks below 1 gigabit per second can currently cripple your online operations. Most of you don't have even a gigabit per second of bandwidth. We don't here. You know, the data center that we use for a lot of our servers, our cloud-based solutions, actually has 30 gigabits per second of bandwidth, and that's for an entire data center, not just dedicated to LKCS. So how much do you have and how much can you afford? And honestly, it doesn't matter because these guys have access to more bandwidth than you do. So let's talk about what you can do about DDoS attacks, what options are available to you. And like I said, you know, already, traditionally there's in-house equipment you can purchase. You can go out and buy hardware and software, you know, and the bandwidth you need to give to those pieces of equipment, and you can manage small-scale attacks. For traditional in-house, you know, this is your you know, some advanced firewall solutions and things like that. They're not necessarily specifically deployed for DDoS protection, but for small-scale attacks, you know, they can work. And that's typically what most banks and credit unions have in place today. You can purchase a dedicated DDoS appliance. You know, we've mentioned this already. They come with very high upfront costs, and unfortunately, depending on your network architecture, how your network was designed, how many of your locations need an appliance. And is that even feasible, you know, for each location that potentially might need one? And they do need extensive support and expertise. The signatures and the software and the microcode, they call it, everything that gets applied to these appliances, you know, you have to maintain all of that, and you have to apply all of it to make sure you're protected against the latest types of attacks. And when these attacks happen, you need to have engineers at your disposal that can write additional filters and additional things to mitigate these attacks, even with a dedicated appliance in-house. You can rely on your ISP, you know, the people that provide your internet connection, or your web host, you know, the people that host your website. They're going to rely on basically traditional firewalls and IDS systems, just like we were talking about at the top of the slide. They're going to offer protection for limited types of attacks. But if your website or your you know, specific location is targeted by one of these large attacks, they're going to black hole your traffic, because your traffic is essentially putting all of their other customers at risk of a denial of service attack as well. So I mentioned that one of the data centers that we use has 30 gigabits per second of bandwidth available. They actually have 2 redundant 30 gigabit connections. So their plan, you know, when we contacted them and asked them how our systems are protected against DDoS, what they told us is, well, if we see a large-scale DDoS attack, we will move your traffic to our backup internet connection. But as soon as that attack, you know, exceeds a certain amount of bandwidth, they will black hole the traffic and tell us that we need to contact the DDoS mitigation company. I highly suggest that you contact your ISPs and your web hosting companies and ask them, and this is exactly what the NCUA has recommended that you do as well. Find out what protection is available, because I think you'll be surprised and find out that, you know, a lot of these companies will simply just shut off essentially your website, black hole that traffic, so that they can continue providing services to their other customers while they figure out, or you figure out, how to mitigate the attack against your credit union. There are content distribution networks, and the idea of a content distribution network is that the static content of your website, the photos and text and all of the static content, the things that are not, you know, transaction based and change, you know, from minute to minute, is actually all of that static content is hosted at numerous data centers all around the world. And then when a request is made for that web content, it is delivered from the geographically closest server that has cached that content. The problem is that DDoS attacks can bypass that cache and still send requests directly to the origin server. So while at first they seem like a legitimate way of kind of spreading out your website and improving, you know, enhancing significantly the amount of bandwidth and the speed with which your site can be delivered, certain requests for variable content are still going to go back to that origin server. So all of your home banking requests and bill pay requests are going to go back to that origin server, and they can still eat up the bandwidth on that origin server. So again, they're not designed specifically for DDoS. They offer some protection against it, but a proficient DDoS attacker can get right around it and still attack the original server. Which leads us to basically what is our recommendation for credit unions, which is a cloud-based provider, a cloud-based service. It reduces your costs. They all offer, and there are numerous cloud-based vendors, but they offer multi-layered, at least the good ones, offer multi-layered mitigation solutions and really good expertise. I mean, they have multiple engineers with years and years and years of expertise, multiple scrubbing centers worldwide, that can handle the bandwidth that's required, that have multiple types of these DDoS appliances, even many of their own software solutions that they've developed to mitigate these attacks. And they provide real-time mitigation monitoring. And I think what's really critical, and not all providers provide, is post-event reporting. After an attack, some of them, the good ones, can provide specific information about how you were attacked, who attacked you, and what they did to mitigate that attack. Things to look for in a DDoS solution, first and foremost, is experience and expertise. There's nothing that replaces, the people. And like I said, you can have all of the hardware appliances and everything in the world. You still have to have the people that know how to use them, that know how to write the filters on the fly to mitigate these attacks. Scrubbing capacity and bandwidth. These attacks are getting larger and larger. The good DDoS providers have a plan and know exactly how often they're going to be increasing their scrubbing capacity and the total bandwidth that they have available to their customers. Because obviously if they don't have the bandwidth, then they can't mitigate that attack, effectively. They all, I don't know about all, but like I said, the reputable vendors all have relationships with major bandwidth providers. They can actually add bandwidth on demand. So as they see an attack grow in scale, they can add bandwidth to accommodate that attack. And that's exactly what happened with the Spam House attack. The company that was mitigating that attack didn't have 300 gigabits per second of bandwidth, but they had relationships directly with companies like Google who actually lent them bandwidth to mitigate that attack. You want to make sure that these companies have the ability to, mitigate a wide range of attack diversity. So you want to make sure that regardless of the type of attack, that they're able to handle it. Surprisingly, there are vendors out there that can only mitigate HTTP attacks, that can't mitigate HTTPS attacks, your secure web traffic. There are companies that can't mitigate against DNS type attacks. So, do your homework, talk to these vendors, and make sure that they can handle a wide range of attack types. Obviously, learn about the different technologies that are deployed. I don't know, which vendor is better as far as, the different hardware appliances, but I do know that it's better to have appliances from numerous hardware vendors, that mitigate these attacks in slightly different ways than it is for some of these companies that put all their eggs in one basket. So I would ask about the different types of technologies deployed, what types of appliances do you have in place, what software do you use. They should be able to answer that and tell you they've got multiple levels from multiple vendors, and things like that. They all use the same technologies. It's just some use more technologies than others. Obviously, you want to look at service level agreements. What is their guaranteed time to mitigate an attack? How long is it going to take from the time they see an attack on your website to the time that attack is mitigated? And how are they going to guarantee the availability of your website in the event of an attack? And what are the financial ramifications and all of that? So again, the best providers that I've spoken to all have, very good service level agreements in place. And obviously cost. Cost is always a factor. I don't think it's the most important factor, but that's up to you. But the different costs involved, just to give you an idea, are most of these services will have a monthly service charge. Many will have a per incident fee, so when you're actually attacked, they're going to charge a fee to mitigate that attack. Some have a charge by the size of the attack. Some charge by the amount of clean traffic that is returned back to your website. So different vendors have different ways to charge. Some vendors charge based on the number of domains they're protecting or the number of resources they are protecting. So what types of connections, are they protecting, and different things like that. What specific services are they protecting? And some have an additional charge to actually protect your layer 7 or all of your secure traffic, your SSL traffic, which for banks and credit unions is a critical piece. Not all vendors offer DDoS mitigation on SSL traffic, so I would highly recommend that you find a vendor that does offer that protection, but it may come at an additional cost. Be very, very wary of potential overage charges. Ask each vendor that you're talking to what the potential overage charges are and how much those can cost. I was shocked when I was talking to some of the companies that I spoke to and when I specifically asked about overage charges, because some had what I felt were very reasonable monthly fees and very reasonable per incident fees, but those were based on an attack size up to a gigabit per second, let's say, or up to 500 megabits per second. When the attack exceeded that size, the costs grew exponentially. I mean, it was crazy what some of these solutions would cost if it was as little as a 5 or 10 gigabit per second attack. And like I showed you in one of the first slides, the size of the attacks just in the last quarter grew by 700%. They got 7 times larger in the last 3 months. If I was purchasing, and I am or have purchased DDoS mitigation services, I would not select a vendor that had potential overage charges based on the attack size, because those attack sizes are just going to keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. When it comes to cloud-based DDoS mitigation, which I said was our recommendation for you, there's a few options still that within that arena that you have to choose from. The first option that you have is what I call always-on protection. Your web traffic is continuously monitored for DDoS attacks. The instant an attack is seen, actually even before an attack is seen, sometimes these providers, they're excellent. They can actually see an attack ramping up and start seeing evidence that an attack is about to start. They will start mitigating that attack even before, in some cases, the full-size attack actually happens. The great advantage is there's no downtime, because they're always monitoring your web traffic, so the instant they see evidence of an attack, they're going to mitigate that attack. For you, it may require a dedicated server or router. It's not going to be available with shared web hosting, and even for many of you with dedicated web servers, you actually have to have, in most cases, what's known as a /24. Just you have to have a certain number of IPs in a dedicated block of IPs for always-on protection. We can talk about it in more detail if you're interested. The disadvantage of always-on, so the advantage is that there's no downtime. The disadvantage is that it's expensive. To give you a rough idea from my research, always-on protection will start at $2,000 a month and go up from there. That's an approximate number. It's not a quote or anything like that, but just as an approximate number, your charges are going to start at $2,000 a month and go up. Your second option when it comes to cloud-based DDoS mitigation is an on-demand mitigation solution. In this case, rather than your web traffic being continuously monitored for DDoS attacks, you actually divert it when you are under attack. So you divert all of your web traffic to your DDoS provider during an attack. That DDoS provider can typically mitigate that attack within minutes, typically within 5 to 15 minutes, depending on the complexity of the attack. And again, those are the types of numbers that you should see in a service level agreement from the most reputable providers. On-demand mitigation services are much more economical than always on. The disadvantage is there is going to be some downtime. You have to first identify, and you can use obviously some automated monitoring tools that I can recommend to you to determine if you actually are under attack. But once you determine that you are under attack, you make a DNS change, and we'll talk about this in more detail in a few minutes, but you make a DNS change which diverts that traffic to the DDoS mitigation provider, and they start mitigating the attack very, very quickly. To give you a rough guesstimate on cost, these solutions start at $700 per month, but many of them have mitigation costs when you actually are the victim of an attack. But there is a significant difference between $2,000 a month and $700 per month. And your third option is always emergency mitigation. You don't have to do anything. You can wait until you are the victim of an attack, and then you can contact any one of these cloud-based providers and say, you know what, we're under attack. I need to get you to clean it up. They will give you the information you need to change your DNS to divert the traffic to them. Typically, it takes a few hours, say about 4 hours, for them to provision their network and be able to handle your traffic to mitigate that attack. And they'll charge you emergency setup fees, which gets expensive. I said very expensive. To give you an idea on the cost, and this is a viable option. I've talked to, numerous credit unions that said, you know what, we're just, and even in response to the survey questions we saw before, if you don't feel that it's likely that you're going to be attacked, you may be willing to roll the dice and be willing to accept the potential cost for emergency mitigation of a DDoS attack. But you're looking at probably a minimum cost of about $10,000 and up. These companies know that you're over a barrel. They know you need their services. They know the value, and they know the cost of that downtime. And unfortunately, they're going to hit you in the pocketbook. So right or wrong, or I'm not one to say. I just know that that's what it costs. So I'm going to throw up another poll question based on what you have learned. I'm interested to see which of these options you feel would be a best fit for your credit union. So again, I will leave the poll question open for a few minutes. Okay, I will close the poll and share the results. Honestly, this is not an answer that I would have expected. I totally understand, the emergency mitigation, but I'm really surprised that nobody answered that on-demand protection was something you were looking for. So that is interesting to me. What we see is that most credit unions adopting DDoS, at least most of the credit unions that I've talked to that have adopted DDoS solutions have adopted on-demand solutions. I mean, obviously, the ones that haven't are obviously going to be in the emergency mitigation category. I haven't seen many clients that have chosen always-on protection. The largest ones, I suppose, have. So, all right, let me go back to the presentation. So one thing, regardless of which mitigation option you feel is best for your credit union, there is one recommendation that I have for you. One thing you should do now before you are ever victimized or before you're victimized again, if you haven't already done this, This is a fairly technical topic, so it is to reduce the TTL on your DNS A records. And for you non-IT people, I will explain what that means. So as I mentioned, during a DDoS attack, your web traffic is going to be diverted to your DDoS provider. So whether it's an emergency mitigation situation or an on-demand situation, you're going to divert your web traffic to your DDoS provider. Typically that is done by changing the IP address that your domain name, your www.name, points to. That is known as a DNS, or a domain name system A record. So that A record is actually distributed worldwide to DNS servers all around the world, and you can basically think of it as a phone book. So anybody makes a web request, that web request is going to go to this DNS phone book, and it's going to look up and say, well, www.mycreditunion.org actually lives at IP address, xx.xx.xx.xx. Those IP addresses are cached by these domain name servers around the world, and that's so that, again, to maintain the speed of the internet in general, when that request is made, these DNS servers all around the world know the IP address of your website. That phone book doesn't have to be refreshed very often. They're cached for a certain amount of time. So these IP addresses are cached for so many seconds, and that time is known as the time to live, or the TTL value. You can control that value. So you can control how many seconds these DNS servers all around the world cache your IP address. What you're doing is you're saying, if you haven't checked with me in so many seconds, I want you to check to see if I change the IP address relating to my domain name. A long TTL enables these DNS services to cache your IP address for many hours and even a certain number of days. The advantage of that is it reduces the number of requests made back to your primary DNS host. So your ISPs and your web hosting companies, they like high TTLs because it reduces the load on the DNS servers. However, if you change your IP address, these servers are going to continue direct traffic to that cached IP address until that TTL expires. So a very common TTL value is actually 259,200 seconds, which is 3 days. Those servers are only going to look for a change to your IP address every 3 days. A short TTL will increase the load on your DNS host because more requests are going to come more often back to your DNS server, but it will enable you to redirect all website requests to a new address within a few minutes. So in this case, if you become the victim of a denial of service attack, rather than waiting potentially up to 3 days for all traffic to be diverted to your DDoS mitigation provider, you can set your TTL as low as 300, which is 5 minutes. So now all traffic all around the world would be redirected to your DDoS provider in as little as 5 minutes from when you make a change. So you need to find out who manages your DNS. Our recommendation, by the way, is to set your TTL between 300 and 600 seconds, so between 5 and 10 minutes. If you haven't looked, chances are your TTL value is much higher than that. So to change it, you need to find out who manages your DNS. And that's either going to be you. It could potentially be your ISP or your web hosting company, such as LKCS. In many cases for credit unions, it could be your core processor or your home banking provider. It could be whoever you registered your domain name with, whichever company. And it could be your computer consultant, and unfortunately, it could be your prior computer consultant, which we've seen in many cases. So you need to find out who manages your DTL, your DNS, excuse me, and you need to ask that company or that individual if there is a minimum TTL value that they will let you set. And then one of the important questions to ask, because this is a gotcha that you could come across, is ask if even after you change that TTL value, will it revert to a default value on its own? And I'll give you an example. LKCS hosts many of our websites on servers that we host, on dedicated servers that we have at a very reputable web host or data center known as Rackspace. Rackspace's policy relating to TTL values on their DNS servers is they will let you change them to as low as, I believe, 300, but they only keep that value there for 18 hours. After 18 hours, it reverts to a TTL of, I believe it's 3 days. The reason they're doing that is they know that customers are going to want a smaller TTL value when they're about to change their website to point to a different server. So they'll let you, and it might be actually, I take it, it's not 18 hours, it's 7 days. They will let you change it for 7 days. So I can reduce the value if I know I'm going to change my web server in the next week. I can lower that value down, but then they're going to automatically move it back up a week later. The problem is you don't know if you're going to be attacked within the next 7 days, and you don't want to have to remember to change that value every week. So you need to know that that's going to revert back so that you can find another DNS provider that lets you have a lower TTL value all the time. You can check the value on your A records. So if you don't know how to do that, give me a call or shoot me an email, and I can show you how to check what the TTL value is currently on your domain name, and change them if you can. You know, and again, we recommend a value of 300 to 600 seconds, and you always have the option to change DNS providers. It's not expensive. I mean, you can go to a company like GoDaddy, and just by moving your transferring your domain to them, they will give you this control at no charge. And they even have some premium DNS options if you need to, and that'll cost you like $50 a year, something like that. It's not a high cost to do this, but it's really important to get this type of change in place now before you ever become victimized, so that when you do become victimized, or if you become victimized and you choose to initiate some type of DDoS mitigation, that mitigation can happen quickly for all of your website visitors. And we can help. So if you have any questions about this, you know, again, you give me a call, shoot me an email. I'll have my contact information up for everybody at the end of the presentation. So I'm sure you're wondering again some of the costs, and before I get to that, I'm wondering if any of you have budgeted yet for DDoS protection. So if you can answer this final poll question for me, I will get you the rest of the information that I have. I'll leave it open for a few more seconds, and then I'll share the results. Okay. And this is not surprising to me, because this is what I see when I'm talking to credit unions, you know, every day, is that most credit unions have not yet budgeted, you know, for DDoS protection. It's a relatively new thing that's come on their radar. You know, they haven't considered it yet. They're talking about it in a lot of cases. A lot of our customers and prospective customers are, but the budget funds haven't been allocated yet. So, you know, you're not alone. You're in the boat with everybody else, which is why I asked, because again, I'm not surprised at all by those answers. So what does DDoS mitigation cost? I gave you some of the numbers and I'll share them with you again. But I want to let you know that it really is very much like the wild, wild west out there right now. I think I've talked to dozens of DDoS providers over the past several months. Their pricing can vary widely, and so can the quality and level of their service. I mean, I mentioned some of the differences. It's really amazing to me. Literally, if you Google DDoS mitigation today and Google it again in a few days, you'll see other companies have joined the fray. And how do you determine which ones are the most reputable and offer the best protection? And it's really just asking a whole bunch of the questions that I've already recommended in this presentation. So again, what I've learned, is that always-on protection typically starts at about $2,000 a month. On-demand protection typically starts at about $700 per month, but could cost up to $6,000 per attack. And emergency mitigation starts at $10,000 and goes up from there in most cases. There are exceptions to the rule. I mean, I talked to one company that could offer me the best protection in the world for $200 a month until I asked him more questions. And then I realized it really wasn't the best protection in the world. I can tell you that LKCS does offer DDoS mitigation services. We have partnered with what I feel is the best DDoS provider in the country. And if you contact me, I can get you specific details. But we have designed our solution to be an on-demand solution with an emergency mitigation option. So you all mentioned, or many of you mentioned, that you are most comfortable with an emergency mitigation solution. Know that we have one. I can get you all of the details, and then if you ever become victimized, I can tell you how we can help and how quickly we can help. The very most important thing that I have for you is we have negotiated with the provider that we will offer an unlimited attack size with no overage costs based on the size of the attack. Again, this goes back to that 700% increase in attack size in just the last 3 months. We are not basing our service or pricing on our service on the size of the attack at all. We have very strong service level agreements in place that guarantees the system is available to you when you need it and guarantees a fast response on mitigation. The solution has multiple DDoS technologies like I talked about, and we protect all TCP web services. And we do offer a layer 7 SSL mitigation as well. So when it comes to protecting that secure traffic and analyzing attacks within that secure traffic, mitigating those attacks, we provide those solutions as well. Pricing is based on the clean traffic bandwidth. In other words, how much traffic you're already getting today when you're not under attack. So that's how our price is. The more internet traffic you're getting today, the more costly the service is going to be. But it's still, I think, very, very reasonable. But it is not, again, based on the spike in traffic when you are under attack. It's based on your 95th percentile of clean traffic. It is a low monthly cost with a per mitigation fee. So, again, if you're not victimized by an attack, you're not paying for it. I mean, you're paying the monthly charge, but you're not paying for that on-demand, or excuse me, for that real-time, always-on type mitigation solution. You're only going to be paying that mitigation fee when you're actually under attack. And the reporting that I have seen from this vendor is the best that I've seen from any of them. So you receive both real-time and post-mitigation reports on any DDoS attacks. So during an attack, while your website is being attacked, you will actually have login credentials to a website where you will actually be able to see all of the statistics relating to that attack as it's happening. And after the attack, you will get a very well-prepared report, again showing who attacked you, how they attacked you, and even showing the IP addresses that attacked you and any internet chatter worldwide relating specifically to the attack on you. And you can then take that attack, hand it to regulators and law enforcement, and have all of the documentation that you need relating to that attack and how effectively it was mitigated. Our DDoS protection starts at $500 per month, again based on the clean traffic bandwidth and a few options that are available as well. So I would be happy to talk with you further about our solution and why I feel it is best of breed for credit unions. But I would also be happy to answer any of your questions relating to DDoS in general.